The US State Department is citing increased terrorist threats from militant groups around the world for its global travel alert to Americans. It's not advising people against travel, but says US citizens should be vigilant, especially in crowded places.
It's as we expected. In light of the Paris and Mali attacks, Americans have been once again warned about increased terrorist threats against them around the world. But the fear is that no matter how many times we're warned, we've become desensitized to the cautions and may not understand the level of severity. Part of that is the current mean season, the season of political fear, and the realization that while our government wants us to be careful of what's happening around us, that same government isn't doing enough to close an entry loophole that is more potentially dangerous than any border crossing or any refugee screening system. All right, some reality then. Welcome back to the Hardline. Former NYPD Police Commissioner and former Interior Minister of the Iraqi Coalition Provisional Authority, as appointed by President George W. Bush, Bernie Kerik. And with a Canadian connection to the story, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Waterloo, specializing in counterterrorism and international security, Veronica Kitchen. I want to thank you both for joining us. And Bernie, I want to begin with you. There is an understanding here that in light of what's happening around the world, we must be vigilant. There's no doubt about that. But in your opinion, are all of these political fire starters out here just basically hurting the effort more than helping it and keeping us unfocused on what we need to be aware of?
You know what, Ed, I've said this for years. The further we get away from September 11th, the more complacent we get, the less vigilant we get. It takes unfortunately, horrific reminders for us to get back into focus. Nobody should be surprised by Paris. Nobody should be surprised by Mali. And nobody should be surprised if it happened again this evening somewhere in the United States. The problem is we lose our vigilance the further we get away from these events. We have to realize this enemy's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And we've got to fight it. We've got to fight it abroad. If we don't fight it abroad, we're going to fight it here.
But has the fear at home, Bernie, numbed us? I will be honest with you. I will tell you that I have many friends of mine who simply listen to the politicians, the screaming, the whining, the people saying that you've got to be afraid, and they're shoving it down our throats, and they're going, I'm numb to it at this point. Isn't it fair to say that that's where we are as a nation in many ways?
Well, there's two issues, Ed. One, in some ways it's numbed us, but in another way, we want people not to be numb, to be vigilant, but we also want them to go about their business. I'm going to have my kids, if they want to go to the Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York City, they're going. If I want to go out shopping, to a restaurant, we have to get beyond this fear, put the politics aside. And I'm sick of the politicians and the politics. Put that aside. The reality is there's a threat there that we have to face a reality for. And we have to live our lives, because if we don't, we cower and we give in to the terrorists and what they really want.
Professor Kitchen, let me get to you in the Canadian side of things, because before I talk about what's happening with the Syrian refugees, let me ask you bluntly, why isn't Canada as afraid as America?
I think that the political situation is a little bit different in Canada. We're not a global superpower. We're not as deeply involved in so many places in the world. And we've also finished our election campaign. So there's not as many opportunities to capitalize on the situation to score political points.
So then let's look at exactly that political situation. Justin Trudeau, the new prime minister, he has decided to bring in 25,000 Syrian refugees to Canada before the end of the year. Now, he's not going to make it. It's going to be backed into next year. There's all sorts of discussions about that. But the one thing here, they have decided to exclude single men from the resettlement program. And there are those thinking that that's only going to drive the hatred up even further. What's your take?
I think that's a distinct possibility. I think the likelihood is that they made that decision in order to try to expedite the process and meet their political promise as quickly as possible by the end of the year. But of course, we know there's no guarantee that being a woman, for instance, means you can't be a terrorist. We saw that in Saint-Denis in Paris earlier in the week. So I think this is an attempt to expedite it politically, but I do think that there's a risk that leaving young men in refugee camps, leaving breadwinners abroad, might actually make them more susceptible to radicalization. So I hope that it won't be a long-term policy of the Canadian government.
Bernie, there is a great point here, because if you leave these young men anywhere, it's going to create a festering issue with them while they are separated, the ones who are not guilty of anything, from their families, from their children, from their wives. But then again, as Dr. Kitchen said, here's another instance here. You have these people not only being taken away from them, from their families, but then you have the possibility, just the possibility at this point, that they may or may not sneak into this country. Let's get away from that for a moment, Bernie. Aren't we helping to create a new generation of fear, though, and a new generation of terrorists here by doing what we're doing?
Well, first of all, I think the doctor's right in her assessment. But I also think, realistically, on our front, on the U.S. front, I have major reservations about bringing these people into this country until there's an adequate and proper vetting process. Right now, there is not. That's not according to just me. That's the FBI director. That's his job. He knows better than anyone. And he says that they don't have the proper, adequate vetting process. And until they do, until we can guarantee as much as physically possible that these people are not going to create problems within this country, I don't think we should be allowing them in the first place.
Dr. Kitchen, let me get back to what you said a moment ago when we talked about the type of people that are being brought in. Look, let's just say this. We're going to keep the young men out. Let's say we were able to keep the young men even out of America, wherever. We understand that that is the preponderance of the terrorist. But don't we have to consider that these people are smart enough? They've used women before. They used them in Paris. How long is it going to take before they start using women and children even as targets, as bombs, as suicide carriers? They do these things, and we have to be able to get into it all, yes?
I think of course there's always a risk, and the point you made at the top was that we can never have perfect security. There will always be a risk of terrorism. I do think it's important to distinguish between operations that are centrally planned by ISIS and centrally supported by ISIS, and as yet it's not at all clear the extent to which that's happening, and people who are inspired by the rhetoric, who may already be in the country, who may be citizens, as we saw in the case of Paris. So it's not clear to me that restricting the refugee process solves the problem.
All right. Now, the president last week argued for allowing Syrian refugees into the United States, said that the vetting process is vigorous. He says that if terrorists are coming to America, it won't likely be as refugees. Bernie, this is to your point, and here's what he said.
The idea that somehow they pose a more significant threat than all the tourists who pour into the United States every single day. It just doesn't jive with reality.
Now, Bernie, I heard your opinion on this, and Professor Kitchen, let me get yours. Do you agree with the president, or is he being naive, as many people here in America feel he is?
No, I think that he's right. I mean, the evidence is that very often the individuals who are undertaking these attacks are already in the country, are legally in the country, and are tourists. I mean, and frankly, that's a much easier way to get into the country than coming through the refugee process, which does have these very difficult vetting processes in place.
All right, we're gonna have to stand on that, because we disagree. There's a definite disagreement on that, but I've only got a minute left. Bernie, Congress addressing the visa waiver program. Is it not fair to say that while there may be a refugee here and there coming in, while they may be coming across the border, if we don't fix the visa program in this country, there could be hundreds of killers here right now, and there could be hundreds coming in any day because we can't get this right?
Ed, it's beyond refugees. It's beyond the visa program. It's the entire immigration process and program in the United States, period. The visa program is a problem. The refugees could be a problem, but the borders are the biggest problem we have yet, and it has to be fixed.
I only got about 20 seconds left here. Professor Kitchen, is there any fear that refugees, or terrorists rather, may be using Canada as an entry point to America?
I don't think there's fear in Canada. I mean, certainly that's something Canada would be concerned about. Obviously, a threat from Canada to our closest ally, the United States, is not a good outcome. But I don't think that there's a lot of concern that's happening. Our officials are confident in the refugee screening process. the refugees are being welcomed here as they're arriving, and I think that's by and large a good thing.
We are going to continue on this. We will talk about it again because we're far from settling it. Bernie Kerik, Professor Veronica Kitchen, I want to thank you both for joining us, and have a great holiday season. All right, a Russian fighter jet is down. Both pilots could be dead. Does this kill any chance of a coalition featuring Russia to fight ISIS? Next.